Rav Kook always had a small chorev edition of Shas. I think it comes in one volume, but it's a very small print. And he would carry that with her, and even when he communicated with her, which he did, he always had this Gemara with him. He was a huge masmid.
I think this was in 1924.
That happened. They visited, 1924. It sounds right. What Cook then it was 10 full years before his death. He was still well and could travel. Any case, that's a kind of a personal connection with Rav Kook. So these are some of his comments on the connections between Tefillah and Torah. If you look at the first page, which has the words in English, Rav Kook, Tefillah and Torah on the top, we'll skip for a moment. We'll skip Aleph and Beis, and just look on that front page at Gimel. It's about a little more than halfway down the page. You'll see at the beginning of the line a small Gimel in parentheses, because that's where he quotes a key passage in the Gemara, in the Talmud, Maseches Shabbos Daf Yud, and it reads as follows. Rava was one of the great Amoraim, and the great masters of the Talmud in Talmudic times. Chazyeh, he observed Rav Hamnuna. He observed another Amora, another colleague of his, perhaps a student of his, named Rav Hamnuna. The Komarich Bitzlusei. He observed, Rava was probably the Rosh Yeshiva, and he saw that one of the people in the audience in his shul, in his Beis Medrash, was Rav Hamnuna, and Rav Hamnuna was davening a very long Shemona Esrei. He was davening and davening. Most of the people are finished and waiting to hear Chazoras Hashatz. And Rav Hamnuna was just ma'arich. He was just giving very lengthy bitzlusei. Tzlusa is the Aramaic term for tefillah. And he didn't stop. He just kept going and going with Rav Hamnuna. So Rava finally objected to this. And he said, Omar, menichin chaye olam? Are you abandoning eternal life? V'oskin b'chaye sho'ah? And you're being involved in temporary life of the moment? Meaning that chaye olam is a study of Torah. One studies Torah, which we're doing now. This is chaye olam. We're in a higher world. We're in the eternal world. When we're praying, so what are we praying for? We're praying for panosa, for good health, for peace, peace on earth, and peace in Eretz Yisrael. And we're praying for all these things, which are not chaye olam. These are not divine matters. These are human matters, chaye sha'ah. The things we need all the time. We need health, for sure. We need das, we need intelligence. And we need peace, and we need Yerushalayim to be safe, secure, and rebuilt totally. These are all material, real worldly types of concerns. So you, by praying, you're getting involved in Chaye Shah, the life of the moment, the temporary life of living on this world. 120 years maximum. So that's the Chaye Shah. That's what Tefillah is all about, you would think. Or that's so Rav Hamnuna thought. That's very important. But you're in the Beis Medrash, so put down the Siddur, enough already, enough Chaye Shah, and open up the Gemara, or the Mishnayos, or whatever you're learning, Chumash, Rashi, and that's Chaye Olam. That's a different world. You're leaving one for the other. So that was Rava's opinion. These are two domains. Chaye Olam, that's Torah study, and Chaye Shah, that's prayer, Tefillah. But for who, Rav Hamnuna was no slouch. He had his own opinion. For who savar, Zeman Torah lechud, Uzman Tefillah lechud. Rav Hamnuna, Rava rather felt, in criticizing Rav Hamnuna, who obviously was willing to forego at least some time of Chaye Olam and dedicated to Chaye Shah. Rava felt, Zman Torah lechud, there's a time for Torah, there's a time for Tefillah. The time for Tefillah, Chaye Shah, is limited. So you take Shemona Esrei for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is, and then you stop and return to Torah. These are two separate domains. That is the passage in the Gemara that fascinates Rav Kook. What does this mean? Chaye Olam, Torah is Chaye Olam, and Tefillah is Chaye Shah. So before we go into a piece, we'll study in detail number Beis in a moment. But I just want to reflect a bit with you on what for Rav Kook is a fundamental distinction, fundamental in much of his writings. Rav Kook wrote voluminously. There's a story told that the Ger Rebbe, the Imre Emes, the grandfather of the current Ger Rebbe, visited Eretz Yisrael several times in the 1920s and 1930s. And when he visited Eretz Yisrael, he made it his business to visit Rav Kook. And he wrote back to his Hasidim back in Poland about his experiences visiting Rav Kook. So, sadly, you won't find this in all collections of his letters because some people felt that that should be censored. But I have a copy of the original letters of the Ger Rebbe to his Hasidim in Poland, and he does include his interactions with Rav Kook. In one of his interactions, he came in on Rav Kook. Rav Kook was busy at his desk, a desk in the room you could see now in Rehovot Rav Kook, not too far from here. And you will see that, and when he came in, when the Ger Rebbe came in, Rav Kook excused himself because Rav Kook was busy writing. So he excused himself, stood up for him, and then motioned to him silently, have a seat. And Rav Kook went back to writing. For a few moments, he was in the middle of a thought, phrasing a sentence or two, and he finished that writing. And so the Ger Rebbe said, quote, I said to him in Yiddish, was schreibt ihr so viel? What are you writing so much? You know, writing. Well, what are you writing so much? You saw there was pages and pages of writing. Rav Kook had notebooks, which you can see them also in that museum in Rehovot Rav Kook, some of them. Some of them were censored. But the main point is, Rav Kook turned to him and said, also in Yiddish, Ich schreib nicht für jetzt. Ich schreib nicht für die jetzige Dor. I'm not writing for this generation. Ich schreib für a Dor, was wird schon verstehen, was ich schreib. I'm writing for a generation in the future which will understand what I'm writing. What did he mean by that? Yesh Omrim, there are those who say that Rav Kook in some way foresaw the Holocaust. He died in 1935. So there were people who are Pikchim or Chachamim could already have foreseen to some extent that no good was going to come out of this Hitler who came to power in 1933. Rav Kook was alive and in touch with what was going on already then in Europe. So somehow he was writing for the generation which would have faced the Holocaust, suffered the Holocaust, and survived the Holocaust, and maybe after the Holocaust and then the foundation of the State of Israel, which Rav Kook would have been like the dream of dreams for him, and he's writing for that generation. Or what a friend of mine says to me all the time about Rav Kook, that the one who studies Rav Kook's Seforim now, he's the one that Rav Kook meant. Each of us should think, when you're studying Rav Kook, his writing, you should think, in Yiddish, hat mir gemeint. He meant me, right? He was writing for the future, 1935, and here it is almost 100 years later. We're studying his writings. He was writing for us. So here's what he wrote for us. And one of his distinctions is between Seichel and Regesh. It's a common distinction in Talmudic and in rabbinic literature between intellect and emotions. Intellect is Seichel, brain, cognition, and Seichel, not Seichel, and Regesh is feeling, emotion, the inner self, outer self, etc., etc. Rav Kook, interesting, had an insight, which early psychologists who were contemporary of Rav Kook, Freud, by the way, was a contemporary of Rav Kook, if you think about his dates. I don't have that much to do with each other, but that there's no sharp distinction between intellect and emotions. Your intellect is affected by your emotions, right? When you're very angry, you're not thinking straight. And when you're very much in love, you're not thinking straight, Baruch Hashem. And so there is an interaction between intellect and emotion. And similarly, your emotions are affected by your intellect. Right? in various ways. There are some people who, when they study Gemara intellectually, they feel emotionally uplifted. You should feel that way. But there's a distinction, and yet there's an overlap between the two. And we'll see that come out in this paragraph. So let's look together at this passage, Beis, which is 10, 12 lines from the top of the text on the first page of your handout, on the front page of your handout. Your handout should have two sides. Tefillah. And here's what he writes about prayer. Tefillah, let's do Aleph. Let's do Aleph. Let's do it right at the beginning. Aleph. So start from this time. Tefillah mishameshes lahachnis es kol haTorah v'chol ha'avodah. Kol ha'chochma v'chol ha'hofa'a b'tchuna tivis u'ma'amad nafshi kavua v'hi chayei hashor. Tefillah serves to take all these abstract, intangible, intellectual, the world of ideas, to take it and to integrate it somehow, this is my words, integrate it somehow into a more natural, feelingful ma'amad nefesh. Right? In other words, we have all kinds of things going on in our minds, ranging from shopping lists to the pshat and the contradiction in the Rambam or whatever we're studying or busy with. But these things somehow have to be integrated into our, what he calls ma'amad nefesh kavua, into our eternal, positive, constant ma'amad nefesh, constant status of the soul. So Tefillah serves to do that. Tefillah takes all the concerns of life and brings them into a place of nefesh, nefesh in the sense of neshama, of soul, of spirit. Okay, again, hatfila mishameshet, tefillah, prayer serves, lahachnis, to insert, to bring in, as kol haTorah v'chol ha'avodah, all of the Torah which is intellectual, all of the avodah which is tangible expressions of our worship of God, whether it's bringing karbanot or giving tzedakah or whatever our avodas Hashem is, but it's all this worldly, but we have to connect it to our inner spirit. We have to spiritualize our intellect. Again, my words, but that's what I think he's saying. Kol ha'chochma v'chol ha'hofa'a, all wisdom, which is intellectual, not spiritual by its very nature. And the kol ha'hofa'a, all the phenomena of earth, sunrise, sunset, these are all physical phenomena. B'tchuna, it all serves, this tefillah serves to bring all the above, b'tchuna tivit, into a more natural characteristic. Something closer to our nature, our very nature. Not the things we're actively involved with, which may be wonderful things, but they're not integrated spiritually into us. But tefillah helps us bring it all into spiritually, to something tunativit, something natural. Ma'amad nefesh kavua, to a certain status, a certain position of our soul. Vehi chayei hashah. That's what it means. But you saw the passage in the Talmud that Rav Hamnuna considers tefillah to be chayei hashah. So Rav Kook has what you might think of as a Hasidic uptight. Hasidic, what does it mean chayei hashah? So normally we explained it to mean the life of the times, the life of real life, the life of material, temporal. All right, Rav Kook says no. Chayei hashah means that which enlivens the shah. That which makes the shah, the momentary things we deal with, cleaning up the kitchen for Shabbos, that's what spiritualizes it. It makes it into something spiritual. We're doing something totally mundane and physical, which if we could afford a maid, the maid would take care of it. But nevertheless, the chayei hashah is mechayeh es hashah. It takes things which are temporal, this worldly things, and enlivens them, gives them a certain spiritual life. Lihiyot omedet yashar, so that they can stand straight. Mul yanikat sheva chayei olam. The world of the olam is there for us to connect to, but we have to connect with it, and we have difficulty connecting some of the more mundane aspects of our life to connect them to the Ribono Shalom. So if we say Shemona Esrei and we say Borech Aleinu and we have in mind, I wish I get a 10% raise or a bonus this Chanukah, or whatever you have in mind specifically, which are certainly temporal matters, these are not spiritual matters, but Tefillah helps us be mechayeh es hashah, helps us make the temporal things, things to do with this so-called this world, this real world, brings them closer and integrates them, assimilates them into the unique, to be able to, unique means to suckle, shefa chaye olam, the abundance of the eternal world. That's what Tefillah allows us to do. Those of you remember my practice when I was in shul in Shomer Emunah in Baltimore, so I would give the kids, little boys and girls, bracha every Friday night. They'd line up in front of me, and many of them I meet nowadays, and they're no longer little boys or girls, and they remember the brachos that I gave them. So one was to say, Rabbi, is it permissible for me when I say Atach onein la'odam das to pray that I do well on my final exams in geometry? All right? Now, geometry is Chaye Shah, but I will tell them, if you're going to have that kavanah, right? If you're going to have that thought in your mind, you're going to be Mechaye es Hashah, you're going to make the geometry exam into a holy thing. God has a place in the world for God's geometry too. You're going to make that connection in your prayer. That's what prayer is all about. Or, as another little boy would say, where do I pray for the Orioles? All right, this is in Baltimore. The Baltimore Orioles, the baseball team, which wasn't always a good team. So where in Shemona Esrei can I fit in? I want the Orioles to win the World Series. How do I pray for that? All right. I thought of an answer then, but I don't remember what I told him. I told him something. So he's Mechaye Shah. Next time he goes to a ball game, have more elevated thoughts. Okay. Avol, that's Tefillah. Torah is different, because Torah is not a vehicle through which we reach Chaye Olam, but rather Torah is Chaye Olam. Avol HaTorah Chaye Olam Hi. The Torah is not part of this world, what the world calls the real world, but rather it's Lamala Mehateva. It's supernatural. Prayer is a supernatural concept. We're asking God to intervene in, our geometry exam, or in our parnasa, or in our health. Torah is not doing that. That's what Tefillah is doing. Torah is in and of itself above Teva. Uk'sheyesh Teva, when nature is connected to God, when our natural lives, our mundane lives are connected to God, then the results of Torah can be activated. Uchashiyesh Teva, when there is Teva in the world, there's nature, but there's an acknowledgement that God is involved with our nature, with our natural concerns. Oz ma'alas hanisim gedola ve'elyona miyod. God, Kaviyachol, requires a functioning mundane world that's functioning properly, without theft, without falsehood, without crime, etc., in order to intervene with Nisim. God doesn't do miracles every day. In fact, as Rav Kook will point out, in fact, God finds it difficult to do Nisim every day. Kaviyachol, so to speak. But that's a phrase in the Gemara. But if Teva is functioning properly, if the farmer is keeping Shemitah, and then when his crops are subject, the crops in Eretz Yisrael at least are subject to Trumos or Maasros and not Orla, etc., and when the people are praying for what they really have to have, and not for the Orioles to win the pennant, but for things that are really important in this world, then that's what God can come in with Nisim. God needs to have Teva as the ground, a well-functioning Teva, world of nature, Chaye Shah, in order for him to intervene in the lower world of Chaye Shah. As he puts it, it's a very powerful thought. Uk'sheyesh Teva, when Teva is functioning properly, as it is when Teva is connected to Tefillah, to our prayers, Oz ma'alas hanisim gedola ve'elyona miyod. Then the level of miracles is great and very, very lofty. Avol kishehateva mistaldeles, when the natural world is deteriorating, daldeles from the word dal, which means poverty, when it's impoverished morally, when the world is full of perversions, when the world is full of war, when the world is full of discord, etc., and the world is not functioning, then nikroim hanisim tircha klape shemaya. Then, for God to intervene with miracles, God finds kavayachol those miracles to be a tircha, to be a bother klape shemaya, as far as heaven is concerned. And that's a phrase from the Gemara. God doesn't do it. There's a famous story about one of the Tanoim who's had an infant child, a nursing child, and his wife died, and there was no one to nurse the baby. So God caused a miracle to happen, and the husband sprouted breasts and was able to feed the baby. And so other people were so impressed with that miracle, they said, wow, what a wondrous miracle that is. Wow, God gave a breast to a male, a genetic male, right? And so what a miracle that is. But others said, no, that's ugly. It's not consistent with nature. God doesn't like to do those kind of miracles which are not consistent with nature. He only does them like in a real emergency. He have a destitute or an old Rav, and he has a little baby to feed. What can he do? So then God does a miracle. But that's tircha kape shemaya. God finds it inconsistent. And there may be implications in that passage in the Talmud to which he's alluding to contemporary issues like transsexual transformations, etc. But I'm not going to go into that right now. In order for all of our spiritual lives, chaye olam, our upper divine lives, to be really mevusasim, to be based, to be firm and solid by us, then then they have to be lined up, aligned, I would translate, aligned, A-L-I-G-N-E-D, to the constancy, to the wholeness, to the totality of this character of Chaye Shah, Hamofia Tomid Bekarbenu, this stuff, this function inside of us, which is Mechaye Es Hashah, to use the words of Rav Kook. It enlivens the mundane things in life. If they become enlivened, then there's room for Nisim from coming down from the Torah, from the Chaye Olam. And he concludes also with a passage in the Talmud, a very interesting one. Kol haneshama tahalel yah. This is a phrase from Tehillim, which we say Shabbos at the end, toward the end of Nishmas. Kol haneshama tahalel yah. So there's various explanations in the Gemara. What does that mean? Kol haneshama. Does it mean every soul? Does it mean the entire soul? What does it mean? Kol haneshama. So the Gemara says, Al kol neshima uneshima hilul miyuchad. For every breath that we take, kol neshima, the fact that we're sitting here right now and breathing, and we're breathing in a healthy way, that itself is the neshama speaking. If we recognize every neshima, every breath that we take, every moment that we have of life, and we celebrate it with hilul, it has to have its special hilul. I woke up this morning, I said, Modani lefanecha melachai v'kayom, that's one hilul. Then I went on, Baruch Hashem, shlo asani goy, shlo asani oved, shlo asani kirtzono, whatever we said, I thank God for that too. Constant hilul, that's kol haneshama tahalel yah. That's coming from the ability to be chaye shah, mechayes hashah. We take things which you take for granted, natural physical phenomenon. Well, when you have tuberculosis, you don't have breath, right? You realize that every neshima is a gift from God, and it requires its own hilul. So that's the mechaya es hashah. To take trivial, what we think are trivial things, and to realize they all deserve our prayers. Umiskapel sha'ov olam. And now, what we can do is we can be miskapel, which means we can fold into each other. There's a separate worlds. You know, the one opinion of the Gemara is Zman Torah l'chud, Zman Tefillah l'chud. The ability to combine Chaye Olam of Torah with the Chaye Shah of real mundane life, that's the goal. That's the best thing that can happen. To be there could be miskaplim. They should be folded into each other. They should mirror each other. Then they could be like a fond, Yeshua means like a delight. Haben yakir li Ephraim im yeled sha'ashuim, a delightful little child. Or b'tikvosecha b'chukosecha eshtasha v'esa v'esh'eh b'chukecha tamid. I will always be delighted in your Torah. I will take delight. Shashua is a rare word, but it appears in Tehillim here and there, and it means something very delightful. The English word delight is as close as I can come to the concept of shiashua. When there's an integration between the intellectual and the emotional, between the spiritual and the physical and material, that's the shiashua, that's the delight, God's delight and our delight. And that's his first take on the connection. So I thought that would certainly be one important take. When I study on my own or in preparation for a shiur that I give or for a drush or whatever, and in my study I come across something that I say to myself, Hersh, you can use this, all right? Make a note of it. So what I do, various things, depending whether it's Shabbos or whether it's a weekday, I take out a pencil and underline it and make a little asterisk next to it. Or if it's Shabbos Kodesh, one of my grandchildren, adult grandchildren, once said, Zayda, what do you do on Shabbos? So I say, I fold the page a little bit to come back to it. So he says, I'm giving you a present. And he gave me a little tin full of these little clips, which they sell in any stationery store. It's a little clip, and there's nothing wrong with taking it out on Shabbos and just putting it on the page that you want to refer to. So when I was preparing for this, I see, there's a little, some Shabbos back in the past, I have this particular passage underlined and illustrated. So let's take a look at Dalet. Obviously, as time allows, we'll have to stop only with that one. But you have others you could look at yourself. Again, you have to meet the challenge of reading his, as you can see already, his beautiful, beautiful poetic writings. So,
Did we start Gimel already?
Did we start Gimel? Could be. Could be I jumped around. Well, I started with Gimel because he quotes the passage in the Gemara of Chayei Shah and Chayei Olam. So I started with Gimel because that's where he quotes it. For whatever reason, in Aleph, which we studied just now, he refers to that distinction, but he doesn't make that distinction because he assumes which of the readers doesn't know what's written in the Masechah Shabbos Daf Yudam and Aleph. But it's quoted here, so I pointed out to you, you could see the exact text. Actually, it's not the exact text, but it's very close to the exact text. But it makes a distinction in Chazal of Chayei Shah to Chayei Olam. Rav Kook is doing a revolution here. He's not looking at it as two separate domains. He's saying the ideal is to combine the two domains. It's not a spiritual world and a material world. We have to spiritualize the material world, or in his language, this is his creative thought, to be mechayeh es hashah. But do we have down there here? Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Yosef Kamei. Yeah, okay, so in the second page, or if you just turn over your sheet near the top of the second page, you have Dalet. Rabbi Yirmiyah. Yirmiyah is a very interesting Amora who is always asking challenging questions. In fact, in the Gemara, sometimes he's referred to kind of critically. What are you asking so many silly questions for? They threw him out of the base medrash. And sometimes they deal with his questions very seriously, even though they seem to be far-fetched. But that's Rabbi Yirmiyah. He's a very frequently quoted Amora. So here's the story. Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Yosef Kamei de Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah was sitting in front of Rav Zera, meaning Rabbi Yirmiyah was the Talmud, the student in the classroom in the base medrash, and Rav Zera was the Rosh Yeshiva. He was giving the shiur from up front and from the speaker's platform. V'habuaski b'shmaitza, and they were studying Gemara. Shmaitza means they were studying Torah Shabbal Peh. Noga litzluyeh. All right, so then Rav Zera was kind of making signals that it's time to pray. All right, Mincha is what time is it here in this room? 1:20. mincha. So here he was giving a shiur, was already 1:12, you know. So Rav Zera was getting impatient, and he was like kind of buttoning his jacket, maybe putting on his gartel, whatever. He was ready for prayer. So Rav Yirmiyah says, "What are you waiting for prayer for? We're in the middle of learning Torah, you know." So Rav Yirmiyah says, "V'hava komisare Rav Yirmiyah." Rav Yirmiyah was kind of, wait a second, mincha can wait. 1:20, we'll do it 1:30. That's fine. Kora ale Rav Zera. So Rav Zera applied the following pasuk, as a pasuk in Mishlei. Rav Zera, the rabbi, the master, applied this Torah to his student, Rabbi Yirmiyah, which is also meant as a criticism of Rabbi Yirmiyah. You know, what do you mean not rushing for Tefillah? You're going to prefer Torah, you're going to postpone a mincha, Tefillah, whatever, because of Torah? Look at this pasuk in Mishlei. Mishlei is Shlomo HaMelech, it's the wisest of all men. So he writes in Mishlei the following: Meisir ozno mishmoa Torah, the person who turns his ear away from hearing Torah. He says, okay, I had enough Torah. It's time for mincha. Such a person, gam tfilaso toeva. His prayer is an abomination. Now, toeva is a very strong word, which is used for some very, very abominable practices, which may be currently popular, but they're called toeva. Toeva is a very strong word. Often translation, English translation, translated as an abomination. So your prayer will be an abomination if you don't want to learn Torah, you know, if you turn your ear away from Torah. So meisir ozno mishmoa Torah. If a person doesn't want to study Torah, his prayers are an abomination. So Rav Kook analyzes this pasuk in a beautiful way, which we'll come to in a moment. We have a little time. So I want to tell you a story about my early teens. When I and my peers, 15-year-olds, we were in a group called the Pirchei Agudas Yisrael. It's like a youth group, but the Pirchei are budding flowers. We were all budding flowers. At age 15, we were kind of cute budding powers. We went in all kind of different directions over the past long time. And we had like a youth minyan. Rav Aaron Kotler, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, who founded really much of American Judaism today, and the founder of the yeshiva in Lakewood. So he was very busy throughout most of his life in other important causes like Vada Hatzalah, rescuing Jews from the Holocaust or survivors of the Holocaust, and Chinuch Atzmoi, and many, many other causes. So he spent his week, he lived in an apartment in Borough Park where I grew up. That's where we lived all week. And then like Wednesday, Thursday, toward the end of the week, he would go to Lakewood. In Lakewood, he would say his shiurim in the yeshiva, and then by Sunday, Monday, he would come back to Borough Park. Occasionally, he would be stuck in Borough Park for Shabbos in his apartment. So where did he daven? So I didn't appreciate it then, why he chose to daven with my youth minyan. Why? Rav Aaron Kotler. He could have davened downstairs with the main Aguda minyan, etc. But now I understand. I matured a little since then. He was afraid to insult all the other shuls in Borough Park. If he would daven in this shul, not in that shul, so this, how could he go into the Shomer Amunah in Borough Park and ask the people there for money for Lakewood? If last Shabbos he snubbed them and davened in the Agudas Yisrael. So he davened in the youth minyan. The youth minyan, nobody can protest. He wanted to daven with the young boys, you know. Fine. Anyway, so of course we asked him to speak. Not that we understood more than a word of what he was saying. It was difficult to understand. He was way above us in many ways. So, but I do remember several of the things he said then. One of the things he said then, I think he quoted it from his father-in-law, who happened to be a long-time resident of Yerushalayim, Rav Issa Zalman Meltzer. Zecher Tzadik Levracha lived not far from here through most of his last years of his life and was considered part of the rabbinate of Yerushalayim back in the good old days, the pre-Holocaust years, etc. So I think he said this over in the name of his father-in-law. Be that as it may, whether it's own idea or not, it's a beautiful idea. You know, the Ribono Shalom hears our prayers. Most of the time, he's heard these prayers before, all right? Everyone was praying for Parnasa, and this year, Tavshin Pei Daled, believe me, God heard that prayer before from this person and from thousands, not millions of other people. So God could say, that prayer, in Yiddish, of course, God speaks Yiddish. He would say, Ich hab das schon gehört. I heard this one before. So what does a person do who is Meisir Ozno Mishmoa Torah? He turns his ear away from hearing Torah. In other words, he opens the Gemara, and the Rabbi is saying the Gemara, and he says, this Gemara, I heard it before. I know that Gemara. I closed the Gemara. I heard it before. So, ha-meisir Ozno Mishmoa Torah. If a person says, with reaction to the Torah that's being taught, I'm not going to this class. I know this rabbi. I heard him before. So he turns his ear away. Meisir Ozno Mishmoa Torah. Gam Tefillah so toeva. So his prayer is rejected by God. Because God heard his prayer before. God has his prayer millions of times before. It's nothing new. You need a few bucks. You're not the only one. Lots of people have the same thing. God could have that reaction. If you have that reaction to his Torah, he can have that reaction to your tefillah. Ha-meisir azno mishmoa Torah, gam tefillah so toeva. But that was something that I think Rav Aaron Kotler geared to the age of the average 15-year-old. We loved that word. We would teach each other, every time someone didn't want to listen to something that my chavrusa wouldn't listen to my chiddush, I would say, Meisir Ozno Mishmoa Torah, Gam Tefillah so toeva. You're not going to mincha, you're going to daven for the Orioles or for the geometry exam, and you're not going to listen to you. Anyway, Rav Kook had a different take. And he says as follows, and let's pay attention to this because I think this is really very, very important. Well, I'll skip around in it because it's a little lengthy. Ha'adam poneh miteva nafsho el rikshei hakodesh. A person turns away from the natural things that he encounters in life to the holy emotions that he has. That's what tefillah, prayer is. Whatever's on your head could be very important stuff, but you turn away from it when you're davening. You open the siddur and you're going to a different world. You're going to rikshei hakodesh, to emotional feelings. Shela hashlimeim ulahotziyem, to complete them, to really express them. Min hakoach lepoel, from potential to actual, to express in reality. Mima'amakei nafsho, if you want to express yourself emotionally, you can't do it by sitting down on a laptop and typing out a message. It's not going to work. The laptop wasn't made to communicate with God. It was made to communicate with each other. That's routine stuff. You're going to have to bring it to another level. You're going to have to bring it to a level where you're communicating with God. Derusha lo hatfila. For that you need prayer. Prayer activates the soul so that you're now communicating not with mundane matters or mundane means of communication, but rather with God himself. Omnam, b'zeh yuchal litos b'dover echad kololi. You can make a mistake which is a general matter. Shaharei, kishem sheyesh lo nitiyos ruchnios. Just like we all have spiritual tendencies. Everybody has a spiritual tendency. We all want something higher, something better, something more divine. We all have that. All humans have some natiya to faith. In fact, scientists feel they have found a religion gene or an altruism gene. It's part of us, spirituality. Mitzat teva nafsho hamaskeles. That comes from our nature, from our intellectual nature. Kiesh lo hamon rikshos. I have many, many emotions. Lekama chafetzim. I have many, many desires. Urisonot chamriim. I have material desires. I'd like a comfortable home. I'd like to hear nice music. I'd like to have a nice car. These are all natural, and they're not morally negative, but they're material chamriim. V'hinei zeh yaskil kol adam. So everyone knows. Anyone with any degree of intelligence knows. Shebahachovat horikshot hasorarot bilvav ha'adam. As you broaden the emotions which storm up, the passions which storm up in the heart of man, el ho'inyonim hachumriyim, when it comes to these natural things that we want in life, and they can be all kinds of lusts and desires, legitimate ones, v'chol hashayach lohem, and everything connected to real life things that we want, ein tov la'adam, ki im sheyihiyu midrochim al pi mishpatas haTorah. All of these wants are okay if they're consistent with Torah. If you want a nice car because you want to be able to do carpool for all the kids in town who don't have cars, it's fine to want a nice, comfortable car, an SUV. You want to take all the kids whose parents, for whatever reason, can't afford a car, and they can't get their kids to school on time. You want to do that. And so you can have lust for a nice car. Okay, that's legitimate if it's informed by the Torah. Nothing wrong specific with, for anything that you want, even for the final grade on the geometry exam, if you subject it to Netios Ruchnios. The Rambam himself writes that it's very important to know geometry, and there are many Masechtos and Shas, Masechtas Sukkah among them, Masechtas Kalayim. If you don't know basic geometry, you're not going to understand the Mishnah or the Gemara. And if you understand basic geometry as it's taught today, you don't even need Rashi anymore, because Rashi didn't know Euclid, right? But if you subject it to Torah, then there's all these what he calls the Netiyot Chomriot, Ritzonot Chomriyim are all legitimatized. V'hinei zeh yaskil kol adam, etc. Ein tov l'adam kiyim shemidrachim v'yom Torah hanosenes tzedek b'chol orchoseho. That the Torah bestows tzedek, righteousness, on all of its ways. You can be going on a trip to go to Las Vegas and gamble and then throw away your money, which could have gone to better causes. But it's also possible to go to Las Vegas to see a new sprouting Jewish community and to see how young couples are moving there, et cetera, and to help them in some way, and then make the trip to Las Vegas kosher v'yosher. So that's how tzedek informs all the paths in life. U'madreches es ha'adam b'derech tova v'yeshora. U'behayozev nefesh ha'adam l'shifo se'ach hamrios v'chol ha'tola b'hem below misoras ha'torah. Suppose you subject all of your desires and wills and objectives and plans and goals without the tradition of the Torah. Halo yipol benoflim, you're going to fall among the fallen. V'yidrach derech avadonu moves, and you're going to walk the path of being lost, abandoned, and death. But we all think that for our spiritual desires, for them I don't need to subject my spiritual desires to Torah. It's intrinsically spiritual. Hashem, I love God. I can sit and watch the sunset over the mountains, and I have this divine experience. I see God as the master of the universe, and I love the experience, etc., etc. A God close to, let's say, Einstein's God. Not subject to Torah. It's subject to his understanding of nature at the highest level of human ability. But it's still a spiritual longing, but not guided by Torah. So we make the mistake of thinking, that's fine. Like I can spiritually communicate with God by watching a beautiful sunset. So Rav Kook teaches us not so true. Yuchal ha'adam lachshov, a person, I'm skipping around a little bit, but a person could think, she'eino tzarech lefalesh lohem klal nesiv limudi. I don't have to go and study Torah. I can communicate with nature in a way that I am just drawn to the higher power, to whatever that means. Ki im yazoves nafsho al pi darko. If you do that, if you abandon yourself, tishke ba'ahavas sur lomim. This way you will fall in love with the Rock of Ages. Tizkageya, you will long for him. Tichsof, you will desire him greatly. Tiranein mikiros libo, v'tashpech siach, you'll be able to talk to God, etc. Kechol asher tisarucha ha'ola el al. V'imkein li'oso ha'argosh ha'ruchnis shehem se'ifei Tefillah yechoshev she'ein sorech b'hadroch ha'toranis. A person can even pray Shmona Esrei and say, I don't have to learn Mishnah Brura. I don't have to learn the dinim of when could you be mafsik in the middle of Shmona Esrei if the Kaddish, the Shliach Tzibur. I can be completely absolved like some people are in the Chayei Shah and praying. Can say Tehillim all day, but if you don't know what Tehillim means, a lot of people say Tehillim religiously and don't know what the words mean. Excuse me, but people wiser than I have made this point. You have all kinds of groups, women, for men, everything, to say Tehillim, say this kapitel, that Tehillim. Ask some of the people, what does these words mean, all right? Mashlich karcho chefitim. What does that mean? So you have to have Torah, and Tehillim is Torah. You can study a shir in Tehillim with a good teacher, or with Rashi, or with Mitzudas, or with an English translation, etc. And that's limud Torah. If you say Tehillim and you're spiritually moved by it, some words do connect and some don't, but you sing it beautifully, etc. Or you have a good niggin to sing with it, you're spiritually uplifted. Rav Kook says that's not enough. It has to connect to Torah. This is his chidush. You might think prayer is enough for me. It's a spiritual experience. That's enough. I don't need Torah. Tefillah, and then when the chazan says, okay, we're davening mincha, so quickly he'll finish mincha 1, 2, 3, and so okay, I did tefillah, but that's not enough. He says, don't forget this pasuk, Hamesir Razno Mishmoa Tefillah Gam Tefillah Toeva. That's a pasuk in Mishlei. That's written by Hachacham Mikol Adam, the wisest of men, Shlomo HaMelech. Shebe'emes lo rak, and this is a key phrase. Lo rak li'she'ifosov hachumr yoshel ha'adam. Not only with the person's material desires, she mitzidan, or not sure what that makes. I would think it might mean shematzavam lebehema nidme. The things that we want parnosa. Well, so does the cow. Want parnosa. The cow wants to have whatever cows eat. All right. It's not a divine, spiritual desire. It's a legitimate desire. So he's telling us, but if your she'ifot, your objectives in life are all chamriot, are all material, parnasa, good health, etc., that's not enough, because animals also need health, also need a certain element of intellect, and need the food and sustenance. But it needs a dose of Torah. Tzorachul is yog Torani. You have to have the fence of Torah, the parameters of Torah. Lahagbilon, to limit them, ulisadron, and to arrange them. These she'ivos are fine, but they have to be limited. They have to be directed. They have to have priorities. Kigam l'she'ifotov haramot haruchniot. Because even with your spiritual desires, shehem yisodei hatfilah ve'inpeha, that you might think prayer is spirituality. I'm free to do it however I want. I can say the same Talmud Levracha today in the middle of the summer, or I can skip it, or say I can do whatever I want. I'm spiritual. No. Even in spiritual matters, spiritual objectives, which are certainly legitimate, but they need to be directed properly, contained, and there need to be priorities. Etc. Ki gam l'shivosov haramot haruchniot shehem yisodei hatfilu v'npeot tzorichu lahakbala v'haracha toranit. They have to be boundaried, fixed boundaries, perimeters. Suppose the person wants to say Tehillim all day, very nice, but the Gemara says the person who says Hallel every day of the year is Mecharef u'Megadef. You can't always be on these upper spiritual levels. You got to come down in certain ways. I'll answer questions in a moment. Let me just kind of finish the way he puts this. He said it so bluntly, so clearly, so beautifully. Al Kain hameisir is no mishmoa Torah. A person turns his way for Torah. Lo zo bilvat shehamon rikshav hachamer yosei hafchul latoeva. Not only with his material desires eventually turn to all kinds of abominations. Not only would he want the food that he needs to survive and to be healthy, but he also wants all kinds of delicacies and things which may not be exactly permissible to eat. Be'ein mora derech. But rather, even one's prayer has to be guided by the Torah. He's facing God. You're standing there and you're communicating with God. You might think, I need no Torah. I need no other parameters. I need no guidelines. I need no restrictions. I need no priorities. If you don't have the proper intellectual divine guidance to restrict, to contain your enthusiastic mystical experiences, it can become dangerous and negative. And it won't give the good results that you desire. You're going to daven your own way, with your own language, at your own times. In daven mincha in the middle of the night, and daven shachris yesterday for yesterday's shachris, and etc. Say Shabbos nusach on Tuesday because you like the poetry of the Shabbos nusach. No, that becomes tefillah so toeva. It's a toeva. Therefore, you can't abandon Torah. Don't abandon Torah because you want to pray. Even your prayer, you want your motives are fine, your objectives are wonderful, they're proper, they're holy and they're lofty. Prayer is a result of these lofty emotions. But nevertheless, you have to fetch from the well springs of Torah as shiurav, the measurements, what to say, how long to say it, how long to daven, what to emphasize. L'das kol mishpato liyashro b'derech hachayim hatovim. That's the way you guide your entire life, like Chayim Tovim. Who doesn't want Chayim Tovim? And Chayim Tovim ha'ola l'mala l'maskil. That goes above just plain old-fashioned intelligence. You have to combine the two, Chaye Shah and Chaye Olam, and you can't abandon Torah for Tefillah, and you can't abandon Tefillah for Torah, but you have to somehow bring them together. That's his theme, one of his themes. I thought I'd share it with you, and it's Hashem, next couple of weeks we'll look at a different aspect, not Rav Kook necessarily, but different aspects of Torah. Here we're talking about Torah as what infuses the material life, the daily mundane life that we all have and need, and which is perfectly legitimate, but that has to be infused with the hagbalot, with the restrictions, with the limitations, with the guidelines of Torah. Yeah.
I want to know
I'll tell you the truth, and maybe it'll hurt. Okay. Madregot yesh. There are all kinds of levels. There was a time not so long ago in Jewish history is a long history, when women would say Tehillim, and women had no education, no Jewish education, and no any education. The time was not so long ago, and maybe it still persists in certain sectors of the community. And so they say Tehillim, and that wasn't just for women. That was for men who, for one reason or another, weren't intellectual enough, or those soldiers who were drafted into the Tsar's army and had to serve 25 years, and they were kidnapped as 6-year-olds from the streets in the shtetl, which is also not so long ago in Jewish history. It's only about 150, 160 years ago. They came back from those 25 years in the Tsar's army, and of course they couldn't understand Tehillim. So they had a chevra Tehillim in the shul, and they recited Tehillim. You know, it's better than the alternatives, and there is a power to the words of Tehillim. That's for sure. That I totally agree with. There is a power to the words themselves. And even if you study it, you know, with all the Mefarshim, you're still going to come across phrases that you don't understand, because David HaMelech was David HaMelech, and you can always connect with what his metaphors are, especially when if you follow Tehillim, even at the simplest level, a lot of his metaphors have to do with war. You know, so when there's a war on, unfortunately, Jews face many wars, but the Jews haven't recently in Jewish history, I mean in several millennia, had an army. And we didn't have our own sons and grandsons in the army at this very moment. So we find comfort for those phrases in Tehillim, which go in Tehillim. You'll see they're all over the place. David was a warrior. David had his own generals and his own general staff, and he rose to power because of his military skills against the giant Goliath. So sometimes in the good years, we find it kind of, what am I praying for victory at war? What war? Who war? You know, and sometimes we forget that at this very moment in time, I'm speaking and recording, who knows when someone will listen to it, but at this very time, with what's the Yud Beis Yud Gimel Sivan Tavshin Pei Dalet, we are at war, and not only on one front, it's on many fronts, and it's not only military war, it's anti-Semitism, etc. So all of this takes on a different meaning. So the extent that you're aware of the meaning, and you can personalize the meaning of Tehillim, so then Tehillim becomes a whole different Tehillim. It's not just, hey, I assigned you kapitlich kuf to kufel. You say, oh, I said kuf tal. I said not, you know. It's important. Obviously, it has some power and some meaning, and it's certainly better than watching the news all day. But nevertheless, there's an aspect of it that you have to use your intellect. You have to know what it's all about. What is he asking for? And then you find once you begin to do it, I taught classes in Tehillim, both online and in person. People often come to me, all kinds of people, that as they begin to understand Tehillim, they can connect to whole different levels of spirituality. You know, to move away from war. What happened with David HaMelech when he was confronted by a Navi, by Nasan, with the sin that he committed with Bathsheba? So I came across a phrase in the Rabbeinu Yonah's commentary on the beginning, near the beginning of Pirkei Avos. He said such a beautiful thing. He says, look at that kapitel Tehillim. I think it's Nun Aleph. I'm not sure, 100% sure, but you can find it. Nasan, it contains the words, B'vo love Nasan Hanavi, al Devar Bathsheba. So David HaMelech is sitting there, the king of kings, gets a knock on the door. Who shows up? Rabbi Nasan. Rabbi Nasan, I got to speak to you about something important. So David could have been thinking then about various important things, and Nasan Hanavi confronts him with his sin. And what does David do? What does he say? I sinned. I have to do tshuva. Right? That, to me, that's one of the most powerful, that's what made David HaMelech David HaMelech. Shaul, when he was confronted by Shmuel with his sins, which were military sins, failure to wipe out Amalek, important sins, he didn't say, oh, I sinned. He said, no, I thought better. I thought maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. He started rationalizing. And David HaMelech says, and that Kapil of Tehillim says it Tehillim-like. It's also recorded in Tanakh, but he says it, the words of Tehillim. He immediately confessed, and then he says words which are familiar to us. Adonai sefasai tiftach, ufi yagid tehilasecha. We say it before every Shmona Esrei, Shabbos, Yom Tov, Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av, whatever. We begin with those words of Tehillim, which is part of David's reaction. So the Rabbeinu Yonah was a Rishon, a contemporary and close relative of the Ramban. He says, what was David doing? Because David's first thought, oh, I sinned, I'll bring a korban. Right? There was a Mishkan then. There was a Mizbeach. He could have brought a korban chatos, right? And with a korban, with an animal sacrifice, you get forgiveness. But David realized that those laws of sacrificial animals that you bring upon the Mizbeach and that bring forgiveness are only if you did the sin b'shogeg, if you did the sin unintentionally. You woke up on Shabbos morning and for some reason you thought it was Tuesday. So you turned on the stove and started cooking up coffee, and then all of a sudden you realize, I give out, it's Shabbos. Then you have to bring a korban chatas because your sin was absolutely an innocent sin. It had no intention behind it. But David didn't sin unintentionally with Bathsheba. David knew exactly what he was doing and exactly what he was getting into and exactly how he was sinning. So for that, right, Rabbeinu Yonah, the korban that he could have brought, there was then a mishkan and a mizbeach, but it's only for shogeg. He needed a kapara for a mazid. He didn't need a kapara for something he did, fully aware of what he was doing, fully informed. Maybe he didn't have two witnesses telling him don't do that, but it was still a mazid. For that, prayer helps more than a korban. So David HaMelech, instead of turning to a korban, he says, Hashem, sefosai tiftach, permit me to speak to you. I have stained lips. I have a stained heart. Sefosai tiftach, help me open my lips. Ufi yagid tehilasecha, let my mouth praise your glory, etc. And then, slach lanu, mechal lanu. But first he had to kind of gain entree into the Ribono Shel Olam's, to get connected. That's why he said at that point, Adoni sefosai tiftach. I can bring 400 cows, 900 sheep, and 1,200 goats. It's not going to bring forgiveness. I have to do it verbally with Tefillah. And that's part of the koach of Tefillah, according to Rabbeinu Yonah. That's an idea that Rav Kook would be proud of too, but it's from Rabbeinu Yonah who said it. I think we can stop with that at this point. And Hashem will resume next week at 10:15.